So, new look who dis. Today, the project at hand is a custom snake. TRS on one side, XLR on the other, 9 channels. Why build a snake when you can just buy one? Well, with a few tools, a little time and patience, you can build super bougie cables for very inexpensive compared to ordering custom cables. You could just do it yourself. So, what is needed to perform such a task? Well, really only a few things. There's some essential things you need and some very nice things to have. Number one thing you need is a soldering iron. And this bad boy is hot. And now these come in all shapes and sizes and price ranges. This is a Weller WES51. I have several Weller soldering irons, and they have served me well through many a cable and PCB build. If you want a soldering iron that works in the 45 to 60 watt range, this one's nice. It's adjustable from 35 watts up to 85 watts. 85 watts is like way higher than pretty much anything I'm going to solder. Today we're going to run right around between 55 and 60 watts. A very important thing to have with your soldering iron is a soldering iron holder. You can get the little stamped metal ones that you set down on the desk, but I can tell you from experience that if you get those, you're most likely going to burn the crap out of your hands at some point. So just get one of these little stand doodads. You need a sponge. I actually took a razor blade and made some little slices in this, and you can run your soldering iron through there to clean it. Useful to have, but not necessary, is a little copper ball of copper thing. And this cleans the soldering iron very well. It's not essential, but these are pretty nice. You're going to need a set of diagonal cutters. Super sharp ones are best. These ones actually suck. You probably want to get some Heikos, or you can just buy your garden variety Harbor Freight ones. Important. Then you need some strippers. Now these come in all sorts of styles. These are a more traditional pair with the wire gauges right on there, if that will focus. And these are automatic ones from the beloved and now gone Radio Shack. These are probably my preferred ones. You could also use something like this. This is about as cheap as they get, and these actually work pretty well, but you can see from the crustity crust that these don't get used all that often. And you could even skip the strippers altogether. If you're brave, you can actually strip wires with diagonal cutters. Although the chances that you're going to nick the wire underneath are going to be higher. It's a little bit more of a finesse thing. Works better on heavy solid cable. On the stranded stuff, it's a bit of a risk. An essential thing that you're going to need if you're building snakes particularly is a razor blade. We'll get to that in a little bit. And then how are you going to hold all this stuff? Well, you could get one of these handy dandy $5 helping hands. And this will save you a lot of swearing and time. Or you could get one of these little bad boys. I popped this out on the 3D printer in maybe 2.5 hours. Worth every cent of the 9 cents it probably took to make. And this is nice. It's got little, tells you where your pin 1s are. You can find this on Thingiverse. This is just a little XLR jig that holds your XLR dealios like so. So, enough of this rambling. Let's get going on this. So here we have Mr. Snake. Rapco Horizon 9-channel. Good luck finding something like this at Guitar Center. Let me know in the comments if you found a 9-channel snake. So your order of operations here is kind of important in when you put things onto things. So the first thing we're going to do is slip on a little bit of this heat shrink. You could skip the heat shrink step, but these are cables for a touring rig, and I want them to be bougie and heavy duty. So we're gonna slide that on there and just get it out of the way. Take our little razor blade of doom and we're just gonna cut a little cut guy up here. Now there's a chance you might nick the wires. That's why we're not running this all the way down at the moment. And we're just gonna peel this bad boy back. Try a very light score, making sure not to go all the way through the jacket, because if you nick the cable a foot down, you just lost a foot of snake. So there we go, we can peel that back and give ourselves enough room to fan out. Now, a lot of cables will have a piece of string, or this one has these little plastic cords in there that provide stability, and that's what they wrap the cables around. You can kind of use that, but you have to be careful because if you pinch it like that and then you pull it, you're gonna strip this wire. So we don't want to break the jacket on that. Sometimes you can use that. Don't pull on these because you will definitely break the jacket on them and lose some XLR. There we go. Okay, now be generous with your fan out lengths. I think this is gonna be enough, so I'm gonna give it a little bit more. It's better to have more exposed pigtail than get yourself into a situation where you don't have enough fan out. Now that is plenty to run this playback rig. So the next thing we're gonna do is we're just gonna cut that sucker off, like so. And anytime I'm using a razor on the outer jacket, I'm being super soft with it. I'm not putting a whole bunch of pressure on. I'm basically just creating a score mark, and the rubber will naturally come apart pretty easy. Dun, 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 dun. Here we go. Now, we don't need these purple boys because they're just plastic. They just get in the way. So we're just gonna open that up and send these to the great beyond. Okay, both sides done. Now for the uninitiated, an XLR plug is typically 4 components, okay? Now these are Nitric brand. Now I exclusively recommend Nitric brand. You absolutely want to stay away from cheap Chinese knockoff XLR brands because they'll only cause you problems down the road, and they're not that much cheaper. I also shy away from ever recommending Switchcraft brand because while Switchcraft are typically very high quality, roughly equivalent in quality to a Nitric, the assembly on them is harder. They require screws, which get lost. They don't grip the cable as well. I just don't recommend them. Nitric are easy to solder, tried and tested. You'll find these on everything from Mogamis to custom snakes built for giant PA rigs. Nitric is the brand. So let's take a look at these components. You have the sleeve or the shank, which is the outer part of that XLR. This is a male XLR. And then you have the boot, okay? That's your first piece you're going to be putting on. Then you have the connector itself, the actual XLR plug itself. And then you have this fitting, which as the boot is pressed on, squeezes together and grabs the cable like so. So you can use very large, stage XLR, or you can use snake cable, rack wire, really, really small. It gets down to very small. So fortunately with the Nitric brand, these little guys have a cut in them. So if you forget to put them on, you're not gonna hate your life. However, you will hate your life if you forget to put on one of these, because that means you have to unsolder the whole XLR, put this on, and then resolder it. Now, this is the most important step, the boot. Don't forget the boot. So we're gonna put these on very first thing when we build the cable. Just throw on all of our boots real quick. So you may be asking, why put on all the boots right now as opposed to putting them on one by one when you're ready to solder each cable? And I'll tell you why, because if I do that, I might forget. and get into a flow where I'm throwing together cables. And the next thing you know, you look down and you just soldered 5 of them that don't have the boots on. So I just go ahead and throw all the boots on at the same time. Ba-ba! There you go. Now, clean desk is a clean mind, or something like that. So we'll throw all these into an acro bin. Now, as previously stated, this is for a tour rig, so we're also going to heat shrink. You don't have to heat shrink, but it does provide a little extra strain relief. Gives a little bit of more security from the jacket busting or a short happening, so we're just going to throw our heat shrink on there. So why 9 channels instead of 10? Well, it is getting hooked up to a 10-channel device, but there's a reason why we're leaving that extra output untouched, and I will cover that in a second video that's coming up about playback rigs. Okay, so now it is time to start prepping these and stripping these wires. So we're going to use these automatic strippers, and I'm going to cut off maybe 3/4 of an inch of the jacket on each one of these. Blam. Okay, now we got to get rid of all these little jackets. So you can just peel them off and rip them off like that. Now, some cables will have a shield that's made out of braided copper, and those are usually a little bit more difficult to work with. Just, you have to kind of unravel them. Sometimes it's twisted copper, sometimes it's braided copper. When it's braided, it's very difficult. You got to straighten it out to get it off of there. This is just foil wrapped wire, or I believe the colloquial term is piss wire. But it carries a signal just fine. All right, now that we have all these, I'm gonna kind of fan them out a little bit and twist up these ground wires. If you leave them untwisted, they will go bonkers. So we like to just clean them up, give them a little twist. Some people say don't twist them. I say twist them. And if I'm wrong, tell me why down there. Now, of course, this is a snake, so all this is taking a lot longer, but you have to consider the fact that we're doing this for 9 channels. If you're just doing a single XLR, you'd be done with the cable by now. I wonder if this is gonna end up being like a 2-hour video. Forgot to mention, you obviously need solder in order to solder. So, duh. This is 60/40 rosin core solder. This is what I prefer. I typically stay away from the hobbyist lead-free stuff. The stuff with lead works a lot better. It's easier to work with, although it does contain lead. But you can also get this silver bearing solder. This is pretty expensive. It works well for small circuit boards and stuff. 60/40 will get you through most projects, especially cables. Now we're gonna go through and we are going to strip off a very small section, probably about 1/8 of an inch, off of all of these conductors. And I'm gonna do it on all the cables at once because I find that if you do a repetitive task over and over and over, you get faster at it and the whole project takes less time overall as opposed to doing this independently on each cable. And that is just about perfect right there. Just little short boys. All right, there are some spoopy sounds happening in the woods right now. And I don't like it. Sounds like yotes. Ow, woo. Okay, so now we got our hot body there. We're gonna take this soldering iron and we're going to tin it. What tinning is you just add a little bit of solder to the end of it there. We're gonna grab this guy. And I just do this a couple times right at the start to get that soldering iron really tinned up. You want it to be nice and shiny. Nice and shiny like that. Now we can just take each one of these, let's throw it in our handy dandy helping hands, and we're gonna just make sure that these are straightened out like so. My dog's getting in a fight with coyotes right now. We'll be right back. That good boy scared away the coyotes. Good boy. All right, we're gonna make sure these are nice and straight. We don't want any wires sticking out, and we're going to basically touch the soldering iron to the bottom of the wire, bring our solder in. Now, there's a bit of a sweet spot when you're soldering. It might be hard to see, and I'm sure there's a scientific name for it, but basically the solder goes from this dark gray color. You can see as I hit it with the soldering iron, if it would focus, it gets shiny. So you don't want your solder going on dull. That usually means it's a cold solder joint. So we're just tinning these wires, add a little bit on. After every time, we're either going to give it a little wipe through one of these cuts on this wet sponge, or a little stabby stab in that boy. And we're going to go through, do this to all. Now you don't need to add a ton of solder, just enough to cover it. Now you never want to paint solder on with your soldering iron. You don't want to put solder on your iron and then paint it onto a cable. That will result in a poor solder joint down the line, if not immediately. You want the solder itself to naturally flow into all those little micro crevices in the wires. And it happens in a split second. If you hold the heat on too long, you'll start to burn this jacket. And then you get into all sorts of problems. Easy as she does it. And I guess this is turning out to be a more in-depth snake building video, and not so much a quick and dirty soldering tutorial. So I will do another video on how to make just regular plain old XLRs, and maybe focus a little bit more on the soldering aspect and keeping things short and concise. But if you like longer videos, I appreciate your viewership tremendously. A steady hand is going to be something that sort of develops over time. It doesn't take long for your brain to figure out that that iron needs to be held very still. And you can see if there's extra solder on there that's gooped up, I just heat it up and kind of wipe it off with the soldering iron. You don't want to have a tremendous amount of solder on there. Basically just enough to hold the wires together. And it helps if you kind of position. I've got my arm sitting on the corner of this bench here. If you can kind of find something for your hand to rest on to do this. You could also put the soldering iron in a stand and move the wire up to it, but this is my preferred method. All right, that stage is done. Now what we're gonna do is actually start putting these together. Very important is your pinout. Now you can, I'm not sure if you can see on the video. Come on. There are actually numbers on the front of the XLR. You can see 1, 2, 3 that tell you which pin is which. And this nice little jig has a little reminder in there as well. So we're going to slide this into our little jig. You could do the same thing and just smush it in there, but we're going to use this jig. And we're going to make sure that we're going into the correct pins. So pin 1. That's going to be your shield, or your ground is going to be pin 1. There is no real definitive color coding for the wires. The bare wire that you get, that is always going to be your ground. And then some wires have different colors. This one just so happens to be white and black. Here's a Redco one, and this is blue and red. Now, some snake cables, every single wire will have different colors throughout the entire snake, which also makes it very easy to identify. The important thing is that whichever you choose to be your positive and negative is the same on the other side of the cable. So in this instance, we're gonna go positive being white, negative being the black wire. So pin 2, that's our positive, pin 1 is our ground, and pin 3 will be our negative. So pin 1 here is at the bottom, and then you have pin 2 here at the bottom and pin 3 up here at the top. So we're gonna go ahead and start by wiring up pin 1. So you can actually slide that pretty far in there, and you can see already how helpful this little jig is. And hopefully you can see this. I'm just gonna touch the soldering iron there. And there's this magical moment that happens when all the solder lights up and melds together, and that's when you take the heat away. Don't blow on it. You will potentially cause it to cool a little too fast, and you could result in a bad solder. And that is a pretty okay solder joint. Now, as I said, we're going to work our way around. We're going to do pin 3 next because it's at the top. Now, the thing about the positive and negatives is you don't want any wire to be exposed within that. You can see this sticks out a little bit. I'm just going to give that a tiny little snip right there at the end and just take off ever so slightly so that we get the jacket all the way flush. You want to make sure you don't leave the heat on too long, because if you do, the plastic will burn and melt, and that's not fun. We're gonna slide homeboy in there. You want the minimum amount of heat possible while you're on these pins. And this will be very hot. These pins on this XLR will burn the crap out of you. You can just slide that up. We don't want to cause too much tension on these wires, but we're going to slide that heat shrink up quite a bit and hit it with the heat gun. Now, we just take our keeper, throw it in there, slide this up, and then we take one of our shanks, and there is a groove on this right here at the top, and there's a groove down in there that you can see. So you need to line that groove up. It can only go one way. Kind of like a USB cable. It's hard to get it right the first time. Line that bad boy up. Bring this into play. Screw it in and it'll start to ratchet. Go all the way up. And boom. That is a high quality snake line. 1 down, 17 to go. Yeah, I'm listening to a book. I'm putting music over this part. All right, so before we seal all of these up, we're going to reattach the heat shrink, of course, and we're going to sanity check all of our solders and visually inspect every single one, making sure that, and this is why we do that, because I got this one backwards. Yep, every time. So we have to fix that. This is absolutely the worst. Pull. On this one, get a good solid grip on it, apply heat, and pull. And that is pretty much the story of soldering right there, is that no matter how much attention to detail you pay, you'll mess it up eventually. Ah! This is why you have spares. So, just in the interest of time, I'm just going to cut this, re-prep this wire, and that goes into your parts bin, and then when you have the time, you can go through with your little solder sucker and reclaim this piece for another XLR, but today is not that day. So, you may be saying, hey, that one looks like that fans out quite a bit shorter than the other ones. Well, it's okay. These ones are actually on the long side, which I typically do, and that's why I add heat shrink, as I err on the longer side, but it's perfectly fine to have them short like this, if not better. It's just kind of the way things go. There we go. Now everything has been QC'd. We are going to fire in the hole. Hopefully place that somewhere where it won't start a fire. Now, throw all these suckers together. This is
the best part. And
done.
The heat shrink.
And there you have it. A beautiful 9-channel XLR fan out. Now I've got to go through and do this whole process again on the TRS end. But it's getting late. I'm probably going to hit that in the morning. Thanks for watching. Hope that was helpful, or at least entertaining. If you found value in this video, I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.